Okay, let's unpack this. Life throws some curveballs, right?
Hmm.
And maybe none are trickier than figuring out relationships that aren't strictly romantic.
Uh-huh. Things like, can you really stay friends with an ex?
Yeah.
Or what about that whole friends with benefits situation?
Exactly. And just plain old cross-sex friendships, too. There are hidden dynamics there.
Yeah, these kinds of connections, they sort of push against the traditional boxes,
Yeah,
and navigating them, it takes a different playbook than, straight up romance or even same-sex friendships.
absolutely. And today, we're diving deep into a stack of sources you've shared. We've got insights from marriage.com, Psychology Today, and some really interesting research papers from SUNY and the University of Wisconsin.
Hmm. And this material gives us a fantastic look at the complexities, the sort of unspoken rules, and even some surprising benefits of these specific relationship types, things that often don't get discussed much.
So our mission here is to pull out the most important nuggets, the surprising facts, maybe some practical takeaways to help you understand the dynamics, the challenges, and yeah, the possibilities of relationships that go beyond or deliberately avoid that traditional romantic label. All based on this material, of course.
Sounds good. Let's jump in.
Okay, let's kick things off with that perennial question. Can you actually be friends with an ex?
Right. The sources pretty much agree it's possible,
Mm.
but boy, is it presented as messy.
Messy how?
Well, marriage.com describes it like walking on eggshells. It notes how easily old feelings can get stirred up.
Yeah, I could see that.
And what's really key, according to this material, is realizing that just wanting to be friends, that's not enough.
Okay.
There's significant personal work needed before a genuine friendship can even, begin.
Right. And this is where the research gets really practical. Like before you even try that coffee date or send that casual text,
You got to deal with the cleanup from the breakup itself.
clean up like,
Processing those lingering feelings, pain, anger, maybe regret, and crucially, not using the new friendship or attempted friendship as a place to vent those emotions at them.
yeah. Don't make them your therapist for the breakup they were part of.
Exactly. Holding on to that baggage just poisons the well. And it's also crucial to work on your own self-confidence.
How so?
Well, breakups can really shake your self-esteem, right?
Yeah.
Make you question things. The sources imply you need to sort of rebuild that inner strength, independent of your ex, before you can interact with them as just a friend.
That makes sense. And closure, that seems like a big piece of the puzzle here.
Huge. This material says the healthiest way is a direct conversation, though it does admit that's rare.
Yeah, those conversations are tough.
They are. But whether it's spoken or just internal, you need to reach a point where you genuinely accept the romantic part is over. That acceptance is like the foundation for healthy boundaries from both sides.
Okay, boundaries. So you need to define the friendship zone. Is that it?
Pretty much. Be explicit, maybe just with yourself at first, about what this friendship actually looks like. Is it coffee once a month? A text on their birthday? Or just a polite nod if you run into each other?
So managing expectations.
Right. Having a clear picture stops mismatched expectations, which cause problems.
And maybe the toughest part, this material stresses knowing when to just walk away.
Yeah. If trying to be friends hurts your well-being, if it constantly triggers you, or if it genuinely stops you from moving on,
Right.
it's okay. It's actually necessary to prioritize your own happiness over just the idea of being friends with an ex.
The Psychology Today piece had a really powerful example of this, didn't it?
It did. It describes someone trying to act like friends when they still desperately wanted the person back romantically.
Oof. Painful.
Yeah. It highlighted the pain of needing to finally see the truth about the relationship being over before any real healing could happen.
That really underlines it. Trying to force a friendship when one person secretly wants more, that just seems like a recipe for more hurt.
Definitely. So the big takeaway from this part seems to be, yes, post-breakup friendship can happen, but it depends on doing significant emotional work and getting clarity first. The foundation has to be totally rebuilt on new terms. Otherwise, it's just not going to work.
Okay. So let's say you do manage to clear that initial hurdle. You decide a post-romantic friendship is actually viable.
Right.
The marriage.com article then gives us this detailed list, 17 things, of what it calls unspoken boundaries.
Yeah, that phrase unspoken is interesting. It doesn't mean you never talk about them, I don't think.
Yeah.
More like these are crucial behaviors and considerations that just come up because of your shared past.
Yeah.
They often need really careful handling, even if you don't spell them out every single time.
Yeah.
They're about the unique baggage of a relationship that used to be romantic.
Okay, give us some examples from this list. What kinds of things are we talking about?
Well, a big one is social media. The source advises, don't post about your ex Others might read into it, or it could just trigger your ex unnecessarily.
And definitely don't stalk them online.
Definitely not. That just fuels negativity, jealousy, resentment, you name it.
So keep that digital distance. Avoid old patterns.
Exactly. And respect their privacy. You're not together anymore. You don't have a right to know everything.
Especially about their dating life, I imagine.
For sure. And don't compare your past relationship to their future ones. That's just unfair all around.
And a big one. You absolutely have to show respect to their new partner.
Oh, fundamental. Accepting they're moving on is crucial if you want any kind of healthy connection. Trying to sabotage or undermine their new relationship, that's just game over for the friendship.
Right.
The list also says avoid bringing up the past, especially old fights or sensitive topics. Try to keep conversations, positive and light.
Don't reopen old wounds.
And here's a really specific one. Don't talk about your past relationship with their new partner.
Wow. Yeah, that sounds wildly inappropriate.
It is. And also, avoid giving unsolicited love advice about their new relationship. Just stay out of it.
Okay, that feels like it should be obvious, but maybe it gets crossed more than we think. What about sharing stuff from your life now?
The source advises caution there, too. Don't overshare private details about your life after the breakup, especially things like who you're dating or sleeping with.
Why is that?
It can just make them uncomfortable, or maybe signal you haven't fully moved on, or you're trying to make them jealous. It muddies the waters.
Okay, so maintain a certain level of distance. Don't overshare.
Right. The list also suggests avoiding contact unless needed, especially early on. Random texts or calls might be misinterpreted as you wanting to get back together.
So limited contact, privacy, respect new partners. It sounds like a very conscious effort to build a very specific, different kind of connection.
It absolutely is. The article also suggests things like hanging out in groups at first to lower the pressure, and dealing with physical reminders, get rid of their old stuff or at least put it away.
Clear the physical space along with the emotional space.
And physical intimacy cues, completely off limits.
Obviously no sex, but even smaller things.
Yes. Avoid flirting. Avoid casual touching. The source says mind the PDA, even just like a hand on the arm when you're talking. Flirting is ambiguous. It can easily lead to confusion, maybe a step backward, and it just makes the friendship awkward.
So a very clear line.
A very clear line. The sources do note you can eventually talk about new partners, but only once the friendship feels comfortable and well established. Not right away.
Okay. So the takeaway here is that these ex-friendships need a whole new rule book. Often delicate, often unspoken rules to avoid stepping on old landmines or creating new ones. It's about acknowledging the history, yes, but actively building something completely different.
Exactly. Now, moving beyond relationships with that romantic history,
Right.
let's widen the lens a bit to just general cross-sex platonic friendships.
Okay.
The SUNY research paper points out something interesting. Historically, these friendships are a relatively new phenomenon.
Really? Not always common.
Apparently less common than same-sex friendships, partly due to, past social constraints, traditional gender roles, things that often limited how unrelated men and women could interact outside of courtship or family.
Huh. It's fascinating to think purely platonic friendships between men and women weren't always just the norm.
Right, but we know friendship itself is incredibly important for us. For well-being, the research cited links friendships to happiness, psychological health, fighting loneliness, even better physical health, lower rates of chronic illness, things like that.
Friendships are vital. So given that, what specific benefits do people report getting from these cross-sex platonic connections?
This is where the research shows some interesting potential differences between men and women's perspectives.
Okay.
Men, for instance, sometimes report seeing these friendships as, potential romantic opportunities down the line.
Which, as you mentioned, can also be a major challenge.
Exactly. We'll get back to that. But they also report gaining valuable insight into women's perspectives, feeling they could maybe let guard down with women more than with their male friends, appreciating honesty, different viewpoints.
Interesting. And what about women?
Women reported gaining significant insight into the minds of the opposite sex. The source explicitly says this helped with mate attraction.
Like getting insider information, a spy in the camp.
Slight pause. Sort of, yeah. Getting different perspectives on dating or partners. Women also highly valued physical protection from male friends, feeling safer walking to a car late at night, for example.
Okay, practical safety.
And they also often appreciated that male friends were perceived as less judgmental and not as dramatic, maybe less gossipy, more relaxed, and that they handled conflict differently, maybe more understanding, more able to just brush off the conflict compared to how they perceived conflicts with female friends.
So it really highlights how these friendships can offer a different kind of dynamic than same-sex ones.
They certainly can. And of course, both men and women reported the universal benefits too, being able to talk openly, gaining perspective, having fun, shared activities. So while there are challenges, the sources definitely show distinct perceived benefits that make these friendships valuable to people.
But okay, even when there's no romantic history, these strictly platonic cross-sex friendships still come with their own set of challenges, right?
Yeah.
According to the research.
Oh, absolutely. One of the biggest ones is what the paper calls the perceived sex differences phenomenon.
Which,
It's basically where those differing views we just talked about become a source of friction. Remember how some men saw potential for romance? One study found a pretty significant number. 66% of men felt their platonic female friends could become romantic partners in the future.
wow, 2/3. If the woman doesn't see it that way at all, that's a huge gap in perception right there.
It really is. And it's a clear source of potential turbulence, misunderstanding, unspoken tension. This differing perception also links directly into the friends with benefits, or FWB phenomenon.
Ah, yes, FWB.
The sources note it's pretty common. One study cited found that half of college-aged adults reported having had sexual relations with an opposite-sex friend.
Half, that's a lot.
It is. And the definition is key. It's sex alongside a basic friendship, but with a mutual understanding, or at least an attempted one, to avoid romantic investment. The source suggests it's often a way people try to manage attraction that already exists within a friendship.
So FWB isn't always a separate thing starting from scratch, but often emerges from an existing cross-sex friendship, which then complicates the whole platonic aspect.
Exactly. This phenomenon, where attraction is acknowledged and acted on, even without declared romantic intent, clearly challenges strictly platonic relationships. It forces boundary negotiations. It reinforces that tension around attraction is a real factor, even if it doesn't always lead to FWB.
And the sources also mention that these friendships can sometimes cause friction in people's committed romantic relationships.
Yes, that comes up too. They can sometimes make romantic partners suspicious or jealous, precisely because attraction is sort of acknowledged as a normal potential part of cross-sex dynamics, even when it stays purely platonic.
Okay, but here's something fascinating. Despite all these challenges, the SUNY paper notes that while maybe older research saw these friendships as inherently unstable or just stepping stones to romance,
Right.
some newer studies referenced are less skeptical. They find these relationships are actually much more nuanced. They're not always doomed by unrequited feelings or sexual tension.
Which suggests the reality on the ground is more complex than some earlier theories allowed for. People can manage these dynamics.
Now, here's where it gets really interesting, I think. A specific study you shared from that University of Wisconsin paper dug into something super personal. The dynamics of disclosing taboo topics, specifically sexual history within these cross-sex friendships.
Yes.
Yeah.
This study goes deep into vulnerability within these platonic bonds. I mean, think about it. Sharing details that private, it takes immense trust. The study uses a framework called communication privacy management theory. Basically, it looks at how we decide what private info to share, who to share it with, and how we manage the boundaries around that info once it's out there. When you tell someone something personal, they become a co-owner of that info, and you need rules, spoken or unspoken, about how they handle it.
Co-owner of the information. I like that framing.
Yeah. And in friendships, those rules are often built on trust developed over time.
So what made people in this study decide, okay, I trust this cross-sex friend enough to share my sexual history?
Several key things emerged. Trust obviously was number one. People felt confident their friend had handled other personal stuff well before. They used phrases like sharing is caring, or said their friend kept things on lock and key. They knew it wouldn't become gossip.
Okay, proven trustworthiness. What else?
A judgment-free zone was also critical. Feeling certain their friend wouldn't judge them for their past experiences, whatever they were. One person even mentioned specifically sharing with a gay friend, feeling he'd be less judgy than other guys. And here's a really significant finding. A theme around the absence of pressure. Specifically, it was often easier and felt safer to disclose this stuff if there was no sexual attraction between the friends.
Wait, really? That seems to cut against the common idea that these friendships are always simmering with underlying sexual interest.
It really does.
Yeah.
Some participants specifically chose friends they weren't attracted to for these conversations. Sometimes even cousins or gay friends. Why? Because there was zero concern. The friend was just looking to get in my pants.
That's a powerful counter-narrative. It suggests the lack of sexual tension can actually foster deeper platonic intimacy.
Exactly. It challenges the idea that sexual interest is always the dominant factor.
So how did these conversations usually happen? Were they big, dramatic sit-downs?
Not usually, no. The study found they were mostly informal. People often use slang, not clinical terms, and because the comfort level was already high, it often felt like just another conversation.
Natural, not forced.
Right. Disclosures were often voluntary, like, hey, listen to this crazy thing that happened. But sometimes the curious friend did ask directly. And face-to-face seemed to be the preferred way for these sensitive talks.
Makes sense. And the impact? What happened to the friendship after these disclosures?
Overwhelmingly positive, according to the reports. Friend reactions varied. Sure, some joked, some were serious and supportive. But the study found sharing sexual history largely resulted in a lasting friendship and actually strengthened the bond.
Wow. Deeper connection through vulnerability.
Precisely. One participant said sharing these kinds of deep details ties you to them. And it often led to reciprocity, the friends sharing their own history in return.
A two-way street.
Yeah. And one male participant made a really interesting point. He felt safer sharing certain emotional aspects of his sexual past with his female cross-sex friend than with his male friends. He worried his male friends might just tell him to stop being a pussy if feelings were involved.
Huh. That offers a fascinating glimpse into how cross-sex friendships might provide a unique space for certain kinds of emotional sharing, different from same-sex dynamics.
Absolutely. So the conclusion from this specific study really pushes back against viewing cross-sex friendships purely through the lens of sexual attraction or as just stepping stones.
Yeah.
It suggests they could be deeply valued, trusted relationships where even super personal topics get shared, often precisely because romance isn't the driving force.
Okay, let's shift gears one last time and really focus in on that friends with benefits dynamic using the elite, daily, and BetterHelp sources.
Right, the FWB situation. The definition is crucial here. It's understood as a relationship where people who are mainly friends engage in sexual activity.
Okay.
But, and this is key with a clear mutual agreement, to avoid the emotional investment and expectations that come with a committed romantic relationship.
So friendship plus sex minus the commitment.
Ideally, yes. The goal is often romance-free, low-stress intimacy. But, as the sources quickly add, this is not realistic for everyone.
Right. What did the materials say about the psychological impact? Good, bad, mixed?
Definitely mixed. One study mentioned showed overwhelmingly positive results for a lot of FWB participants. They reported feeling happy, desired, satisfied.
What benefits did they say?
Things like avoiding commitment, maybe gaining sexual confidence, just enjoying the physical connection without relationship drama. However,
But there's always a however.
always,
Well,
others reported negative outcomes, feeling deceived, empty, maybe confused. The sources basically frame it as very much not a one-size-fits-all solution. It depends heavily on the people involved and the specific dynamic.
okay, so it works for some, not for others. If someone does decide to try it, what's presented as the absolute key to making an FWB arrangement work?
Communication. Both sources are really emphatic about this. The absolute necessity of open communication and setting clear, explicit boundaries right from the start.
So unlike the unspoken boundaries for exes, these need to be talked about directly.
Explicitly. You need to discuss things like, are we exclusive? Can we date other people? Are we telling our friends about this? How much time will we actually spend together? Are there specific rules like no sleepovers or no meeting the parents?
Laying out all the ground rules up front.
You have to.
Yeah.
And crucially, this communication isn't just a one-off conversation at the beginning.
No.
No. You need to be willing to check in regularly, reevaluate if it's still working for both people, and be prepared to end the benefits part if someone's needs aren't being met or if the dynamic starts feeling off.
What about the aftermath? Do FWB situations often turn into full-blown romance?
Seems less common than them just ending. What's interesting, though, is that the sources say most partners do manage to remain friends after the sexual part stops.
Really?
Yeah, especially if they have a strong friendship before the FWB arrangement began.
Ah, so that pre-existing friendship acts like a buffer. It helps the friendship survive the FWB phase.
It seems to be a protective factor, yes. If the connection was mostly about sex from the get-go rather than growing out of a solid friendship, it's less likely to revert back to a stable friendship afterwards. Those situations are where people might feel more deceived or lonely when it ends.
Okay. And what about the classic scenario? One person catches feelings, the other doesn't.
Yeah, the dreaded imbalance. The elite daily source calls this a disagreement, interestingly. but suggests it's not automatically unresolvable.
Meaning you can still be friends.
Potentially, yes. If both people can genuinely accept and respect the boundary that romance isn't happening. If you're the one not interested romantically, the advice is, be incredibly clear. Don't string them along or send mixed signals. Don't lead them on.
And if you're the one who did develop feelings.
Elite Daily suggests honesty is still important, but you might need to consider taking some distance for a while. Give yourself space to process those feelings. But again, it comes back to both people needing to respect the established boundary if the friendship itself has a chance.
So the big takeaway for FWB really seems to be success, or at least navigating it without disaster, hinges almost entirely on radical upfront honesty, crystal clear boundaries, and ongoing communication, respecting where the other person is at.
It seems communication isn't just helpful in FWB. The source is presented as absolutely non-negotiable for it to work even remotely well.
Wow. Okay, that really was a deep dive into some pretty complex relationship dynamics.
It really was.
Hmm.
From the careful steps needed to maybe build a friendship with an ex, to those nuanced, unspoken boundaries that come with shared history.
Right, and understanding the different things men and women might get out of cross-sex friendships, the surprising trust involved in sharing really intimate details.
And finally, laying out that absolute necessity of explicit, ongoing communication if you're navigating a friends with benefits arrangement.
It feels like the sources consistently circle back to a few core ideas, doesn't it? Communication, setting expectations, respecting boundaries. Doesn't matter if it's an ex, a platonic friend, or an FWB situation.
Those principles seem universal across these non-traditional connection types.
Yeah.
And they also challenge some common assumptions, like sexual attraction always being the main driver in cross-sex friendships, or FWB always ending in disaster for the friendship.
Yeah, they paint a much more complicated, maybe more nuanced picture, and in some ways maybe a more optimistic one, about our ability to form diverse, meaningful connections outside that standard romantic box.
I think so. It shows the potential if handled with care and honesty.
So here's a final provocative thought for you, our listener, to mull over. Given how complex and, let's face it, potentially fraught all these relationship types can be, and how consistently crucial communication and boundary setting appear across all the research we looked at, could it be that being truly radically upfront about your intentions, your needs, your expectations right from the very start is that the single most important skill for navigating any close relationship today, romantic or otherwise?
That foundational honesty. It certainly feels like it could head off so many of the challenges and heartaches we've discussed. Definitely something to think about as you navigate the diverse, complex, and interesting relationships in your own life.